Welcome to this explainer. We're skipping the preamble today and jumping right into the completely bizarre, totally contradictory final chapter of General Jacques Menou's life. Now, after overseeing the massive French surrender in Egypt, you'd probably think a defeated general would return to Europe in utter disgrace, right? Just quietly fade into the background. Well, Menou's post-Egypt life was actually anything but quiet. It was this chaotic, wild mix of absolute power, scandalous romance, staggering financial ruin, and honestly, profound family tragedy.
Okay, let's dive into this. 153,000. Now, this staggering number, it isn't a casualty count. It's not a troop deployment figure. It literally represents the crushing debt in francs that General Menou somehow managed to rack up in Italy after he got back from the Egyptian campaign. I mean, to put it mildly, the guy spent money like the imperial treasury was his own personal piggy bank. So it forces us to ask this really intriguing question. How exactly did a defeated general end up living like a king? Think about it. After the total, humiliating collapse of the French colonial experiment in Egypt, he goes home. But he doesn't face a prison cell. No, he gets handed the keys to some of the most prestigious administrative postings in the whole emerging French Empire. It's this bizarre contrast, right? It really exposes the political favoritism at the core of Napoleon's regime, and it highlights just how massive the disconnect was between his military failure in the East and this lavish, almost unbelievable European retirement.
When we look at the source material, it reveals a man of just intense contradictions. It's like two different people. On one hand, you've got Menou, the strict administrator. This is a guy known for his rigid dedication to work, issuing just an endless stream of decrees, and ruling with absolute devotion to imperial authority. But then, on the exact same token, we see Menou, the reckless playboy, a man living a totally bohemian lifestyle, completely obsessed with the pursuit of pleasure, going to endless balls, and just entirely ignoring the boundaries of his official job. And he somehow managed to be both of these people at the exact same time.
So how did he get away with this dual life? Well, a huge part of it comes down to Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte himself. Despite the colossal, unmitigated failure of the Egyptian campaign, Napoleon surprisingly forgave his old friend. He even affectionately called Menou the Egyptian, which was a nod to his time in the East and his famous conversion to Islam. Because Napoleon really needed loyalists to tighten his grip on those newly acquired Italian territories, he gave the Egyptian a massive second chance, appointing him to these incredibly powerful positions all across Italy.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because tracking his postings reveals this gradual, spectacular descent from a prestigious administrator straight into absolute ruin. In late 1801, Napoleon sends him to administer Piedmont, officially making him governor there by 1802. He stays about 3 years, then he's transferred to Tuscany, setting up his rule in Florence in 1805. By 1809, his completely chaotic lifestyle forces a move to Venice. And finally, by 1810, the bill comes due, culminating in strict orders to return to Paris right before his sudden death.
Let's look at that first stop. During his nearly 3 years in Piedmont, Menou became completely notorious for ruling with an iron fist. He was deeply, deeply committed to enforcing the emperor's will, just issuing this relentless, heavy-handed stream of administrative orders. He was absolutely determined to crush any local resistance to French rule. And actually, Napoleon welcomed this intense activity. He believed Menou was exactly the kind of firm hand they needed to keep this newly integrated Italian province securely under French control. But then he gets transferred to Florence in Tuscany, and man, everything changes. That fierce dedication to administration completely vanished. It was replaced by this scandalous infatuation with an Italian dancer from Milan named Jean Grassini. And he didn't just have a casual affair with her, he practically made her co-governor. He allocated this massive annual income for her expenses, placed an armed military guard outside her door around the clock, and in just a blatantly crazy display of nepotism, he even brought her brother over from Milan to serve as his own personal secretary. And this brilliantly illustrates just how far he'd fallen from his duties. The local elites and courtiers, they quickly realized that Menou was so utterly distracted by Gianna Grassini that if they wanted to get any official government business done, they literally had to go through her. By handing over so much informal power to his mistress, Menou completely alienated the local Florentine elite. He even isolated himself from his own administrative staff, who found it harder and harder to even get a quick audience with him. But you can't live like that, funding a mistress, acting like an absolute monarch without paying a steep price. By the time Mignon moved his administration to Venice in September 1809, this reckless bohemian lifestyle had amassed that staggering unmanageable debt we talked about, 153,000 francs. He had completely lost control of his finances, and his furious creditors were multiplying by the day, turning him into a massive political liability. Naturally, word of this absolute financial disaster inevitably made its way back to Paris. Now, Napoleon was famously tolerant of his old friend, the Egyptian. He'd been turning a blind eye to the complaints coming out of Florence for years. But the Venice debts, that was simply too much. In July 1810, the emperor's immense patience finally snapped. Just outraged by Manut's total lack of discipline, Napoleon ordered the Viceroy of Italy to command Manut to return to Paris immediately. He was going to have to face the music in utter disgrace.
And Napoleon didn't just fire him, he actually had to clean up the diplomatic and financial mess Manut left behind. To put this into perspective, the emperor had to order 50,000 francs paid straight from his own imperial funds, and another 30,000 francs drawn from the Italian treasury, just to start settling accounts with Manut's furious creditors. I mean, it was a totally humiliating imperial bailout for a guy who had just completely lost his grip on reality.
Now, what's really interesting about this part of the story is the gaping, tragic hole right in the middle of it. While Manut was out throwing lavish parties and parading his mistress through the streets, what happened to the family he had so dramatically formed during the Egyptian campaign? It's right here that the story pivots from a scandalous political drama into something deeply, deeply tragic. If we rewind back to Egypt, Menno had converted to Islam, taken the name Abdallah, and married an Egyptian woman named Zubaida, who actually traced her lineage back to the Prophet. They had a son together named Suleiman Morad. Now, during that chaotic French evacuation, Menno and his officers fought incredibly hard to make sure Zubaida and Suleiman safely escaped the advancing Ottoman and British forces. They survived this grueling journey from Rosetta to Cairo, eventually securing safe passage all the way to France.
But the sobering truth is, once they arrived in Europe, Manut practically erased them from his life. While he was out living his wildest bohemian fantasies in Florence and Venice with his new mistress, he left Zubaida and his young son Suleiman completely abandoned in the city of Turin. They were just neglected in the shadows, entirely isolated in a foreign land, while Manut squandered his wealth and reputation everywhere else.
But Manut would never actually make it back to Paris to face Napoleon's wrath, and he'd never reconcile with that forgotten family either. On August 13, 1810, at a villa near Mestre, which is just a short distance from Venice, Manut's scandalous final act came to a very abrupt halt. He was struck down by a severe acute fever and died almost instantly. The aftermath of his death is just a somber wrap-up to a highly controversial legacy. Manut dies before ever having to face the real consequences of his actions from the emperor. As for the Egyptian family he left behind, their fate was just heartbreaking. The sources suggest Zubaida tragically passed away in total obscurity, likely even before Manut did. His son, Suleiman, did survive long enough to inherit the French title of Count, but historical records indicate he died very young, around January 1810. So in this really grim twist of fate, Manut actually outlived the son he had entirely neglected.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. Was General Jacques Manut just a victim of his own unchecked desires? A guy who simply couldn't handle power and wealth without self-destructing? Or was his wildly contrasting life, from a strict governor to a bohemian playboy, from an adoptive Egyptian to a negligent father, was all of that simply a reflection of the chaotic, rapidly shifting times of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Empire? It's a bizarre, fascinating legacy, and it really shows how quickly both the victors and the vanquished can lose themselves in the pursuit of glory and pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you wanting to explore even more about this incredible era.